Well, hello. Thanks for coming back to check out another video. So, we are here today to do the first update, I guess is what we are going to call it, to the eyeshadow palette tracking series that I'm going to do throughout the year. So in the description box, I will leave my introduction video for you guys. Since we are only updating this every 3 months, maybe you want to go back and reference that, see what we talked about in the introduction. Also, in the description box, I'm going to leave It's Just Steph's channel linked down below because I totally got this idea from her to just sit down and track how many times I use all of my palettes throughout the year. I just thought that this would be a really eye-opening experience because I am sure that I have palettes where I'm like, oh, I love this, I use it so much, and then look, it's going to come December and I've only used it 2 times. I just think it would be, interesting to see that. In the introduction video, I did include, I think, 5, my top, what I think will be my top 5 most used palettes. So it'll also be fun in December to go back and look at that and see, was I right? Did I actually end up reaching for those the most within my collection? So before we get too further into this, I do want to apologize. I think you're going to see this video sometime April, it might be the 17th. I'm not really sure. I had wanted this to go up early on in April and I just wasn't able to make that happen. However, the usages that we are going to talk about in this video are only reflective for counting from January 1st until March 31st. So obviously I'm still keeping track of things, but just so you guys know, we're not really counting anything from April usage on in this video. I think that might be everything. This is the first year that I am doing this. I am not gonna lie, I haven't been perfect with always remembering to mark down my usage for a palette. So there might be some discrepancy, it might have gotten missed here or there, but I'm okay with that. At the end of the day, this is just supposed to be a fun exercise. So if I've missed marking down a palette once or twice throughout the year, at the end of the day, it's not that really, not that big of a deal. I think how we are going to do this, I'm looking at all of the palettes that I have sitting over here. I'm going to divide it up and we're going to do the palettes that I've used 1 time, palettes I've used twice, palettes I've used 3, 4, and 5 times, and then palettes I have used 5+ times. So that'll be how this will be divided up into chapters in case you want to skip around. And then 2, let me just pull one of these palettes just so you guys know what constitutes as a use. I know we talked about this in the introduction video. If I just dip into this palette, this is the ABH Jackie Aina palette, if I just dip into it and use this shade Ginger here, that's a use. And then if I dip into 3 other palettes to create a full-on eye look, that's a use for each one of those palettes. If I dip into this and create one whole eye look just using this palette, that's still just 1 use. The other thing I wanted to mention is that, so I fill in my brows using eyeshadow. So if I am dipping into a palette for just the brow shade or a cream shadow to set down my eyeshadow primer, I did not count that as a use because it just didn't feel right. I feel the whole point of this is to see what palettes are you reaching for to create looks with, not what palettes are you reaching for to set down your eyeshadow primer and do your eyebrows with. So there is that. I just wanted to add, but yeah, I think that's everything. If I have failed to mention something or you have a question, please feel free to ask. Also just check the description box because I really do try to make that as informative as possible. Alright, we're first going to talk about eyeshadow palettes that I've only used 1 time this year. Now I am not going to dilly-dally and go into too much detail about each and every eyeshadow palette because we will be here forever. This is more just about showing you the palettes as how many times I've used them. You know what I mean? So I will try to go brand by brand within the groupings though. So the first palette that I've only used 1 time, this is the only ColourPop palette that I've used 1 time. This is the Blue Moon palette. Now my Blue Moon palette will look quite different from your Blue Moon palette because I did combine the Blue Moon with the On Cloud Blue palette. I will link that video just in case you're curious. But yeah, only used this one time. Alright, let's go through the BH Cosmetics palettes that I've only used 1 time so far this year. So I do have my 4 Birthstone palettes, have only used them 1 time. So this is Amethyst for February, a really pretty kind of purpley pinky palette. Really enjoyed that. Then we have Emerald for May. These have mirrors and I'm trying to not blind you, but just a really pretty grungy green color story. Hello, I do know that this will get more use throughout the year. We have Sapphire for September. I about said September for Sapphire. But that is what this one looks like. This one, again, really screams more wintry to me. And so I really think that I will get more use out of it once we hit that season again. And then the last one is Citrine for November. Now, once summer and fall roll around, I really think that this is going to be the star of the show. This has some really good matte yellow shades. Well, it only has one matte yellow, but it's like the best one in my collection, in my opinion. So keeping it on with the BH Cosmetics train, I do have one of their Sweet Shop palettes. This is the cherry on top. Have used this one time as we, you know, not as we sit here, but at least for January to March 31st. So this one is super pretty. Really glad that I snagged this. It definitely leans more pink than I thought as opposed to like red, but I'm not mad about it. I really still enjoy it. I think it's a very pretty palette. And then the last BH Cosmetics palette that I've only reached for one time is the Lit List, which was their Holiday 2021 release. So this is what this guy looks like on the inside. I really do like this palette. I think the reason I have reached for it so little, like so few times, even though there's a wide variety of options that you could, you know, reach into this palette for, it's a little large and it's a little bit overwhelming sometimes, especially when I'm like, I just want to do something like kind of quick and kind of easy, you know? Okay, another palette that I've only used once so far this year. This is the Glam Like Cake palette. I did get a lot of use out of this in the last half of the year of 2021. Laura sweetly sent this to me, and I absolutely do love this. I'm not worried about it. I really think that this will be something that I dip into more as we get further into spring and into summer. Like, that's really when I think it's time for a rainbow palette to shine. I have one Juvia's Place palette that I've only used once. This is the Tribe palette, one of my absolute favorites. The background of this is super reflective. I'm going to bring this palette in closer. I know I haven't been doing that, but hopefully you can see there are some really good dips on a lot of these shadows in here. So I really want to challenge myself this spring to dip into this and play around, because I feel like I could hit quite a few more pans within that palette if I just put in, you know, a little bit more effort. Okay, I have one Uden's Eye palette that I've only used one time. This is the Norns palette. Again, kind of like with the Glam Like Cake palette, I got a lot of use out of this in the winter 2021 season. So I'm not that mad that I've only used it once as it stands so far in this year. I just think this is a really pretty jewel tone palette, and I do foresee wanting to dip back into this, especially for some of these like single shadows down here. As we go into summer, they'll be really pretty to pull in and do some like bright blue, like pool party themed looks. Okay, I have two Natasha Denona palettes, so the outside of these are super reflective. I'm sorry about that. So the first one is the Glam Face palette. Now, I've used this way more than one time, but what I've been dipping into it for is the cream blush and the cream highlighter. And since this is all about tracking your eyeshadow palette like usage, I don't count it when I just reach into it for the face products. So this is what this one looks like. I do have the dark palette in case you were wondering, but I do still really like that. And then the other Natasha Denona palette that I've only used one time is the Zendo palette. So this is what this one looks like when you open it up. A really pretty mixture of warm and cool tones. But that wraps it up for all of the palettes that I've used one time this year. Alright, so let's move right along and talk about the eyeshadow palettes that I've used two times this year. So the first one, this is from Violet Voss. This is the Wild Dahlia palette. That is what this one looks like on the inside. It's a really pretty fall-esque color story. Really enjoyed that one. I have two more from Juvia's Place, and so the first one is the little army quad that they have. This is the darker green one. I have really enjoyed this and using this as a companion palette. I don't see this as like, it's too dark to do like a full-on look with, but it is really nice to combine this with other palettes within my collection. And then the other Juvia's Place palette that I've used two times this year is the Festival palette. I don't need to ramble on about this one. You guys know how I feel about the Festival. It has a very special place in my heart, so that is that. Okay, I have another Uden's Eye palette that I've reached for twice this year. So this is the Solmana palette, the Sun Moon palette. This is what this one looks like on the inside. This green shade down here is so pretty. It's like Electric from Subculture, but better. I think this palette has been sadly discontinued, but I feel like this is one of their like more neutral palettes that they've put out, and so I've really enjoyed it. I also have two ColourPop palettes that I've used twice this year. So the first one is the ColourPop Sailor Moon palette. I had this shadow which was a Super Shock shadow in Partners in Cream. And if I dipped into this palette just to reach for that shadow, I didn't count it as a use. So that's why the usages on this are so low, even though I have finished off a Super Shock shadow within this palette this year. But yeah, this is such a pretty palette to pull out for spring. So gonna get some more use out of that one, hopefully. And then I have the Lush Life palette. Again, the background of this is kind of reflective, so hopefully it doesn't blind you guys, but this is really pretty. Gives me some Tribe palette vibes now that I'm looking at them so closely together. But anyway, really did enjoy this one as well. Okay, just a few more palettes to talk about that I've used 2 times this year. So the first one is the Melt Amore Mariposa palette. You guys know how I feel about this. It's kind of a regret purchase, but this is what this one looks like on the inside. I'm going to challenge myself to pull this one out further and try to make it work and get more like a solid opinion on it. Another one that I've reached for 2 times is my Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. If I'm not mistaken, this is one of the palettes that I said would be like my most used palette for the year of 2022. So this one, I do want to play around and use this one more. I really do. That's probably, I don't know, between that and the retro, man, can't decide what my favorite is. Okay, back to BH Cosmetics. So Do Not Disturb has been used 2 times. Really enjoy the color story of this, like the blues and the purples together, super pretty. And then I have 3 Travel Series palettes and a brunch palette here. So I've used Lost in Los Angeles 2 times. This is just their pastel palette. I really do like having this in my collection, and I feel like I'm gonna combine this with the Glam Like Cake palette a lot. All right, I also have Party in Puerto Rico, which is, this gives me Natasha Denona Sunrise dupes because it has like the magenta and the yellows. This is a really pretty palette. I do enjoy this one as well. I really don't need to say that. Like, obviously I enjoy all these palettes because they're in my collection. So I've also reached for Passion in Paris twice. Again, this one is like a very dark and moody kind of color story. So I feel like in the fall and winter, I'll be more drawn to like wearing something like this. And then the last palette that I've used twice so far this year is the Avocado Toast palette. That mirror, I did not mean to just blind you. I'm very sorry. But this is a really pretty like green palette. Really do enjoy this one. I'm gonna get my life together and quit repeating myself. All right, so now as we go on, the stacks of eyeshadow palettes get a little bit smaller. So these are all of the palettes that have been used 3, 4, and 5 times. So we will first talk about the 2 eyeshadow palettes that I have used 3 times this year. The first one is the Natasha Denona Mini Xenon palette. I bought this specifically as a companion palette. I really do enjoy the black shadow in here, and I have done a full-on look using this palette, and I did like it. Like, it was a really intense smoky eye look, obviously, but yeah, I very much see that more as like a companion palette. Then a new to me palette this year that I've managed to use 3 times so far is the Blend Bunny The Dollhouse palette. This is really pretty. I think this is the only neutral palette that I ever need again in my life. I have not used every single eyeshadow in this palette, but the ones that I have used, I have greatly enjoyed. All right, let's talk about eyeshadow palettes that I have used 4 times. So the first one comes from ColourPop. This is the Limoncello palette. I feel like a lot of people sleep on this palette, but I just think it's a really pretty, like, springy summer color story. These like shimmer, these 2, this golden and this green shadow, are just chef's kisses. Really do enjoy this one. Again, I said I wasn't gonna say that. Anyway, another palette that I've used 4 times this year. This is from BH Cosmetics. This is the Smitten in Switzerland palette. I have mine in the old packaging. This is what it looks like on the inside. I'm gonna bring it in for you guys so you can see like the cream shadow has really good pan on it, and then I have managed to completely finish off a shadow. This eyeshadow I was using as my brows. So just to kind of highlight what I said in the introduction, like if I only dipped into this palette to use the cream shade or this eyebrow shade, I didn't count it. The 4 uses come specifically from pulling eyeshadows to make a look with. So the last palette that I have used 4 times, and again, this is why I think I haven't always been really good about counting the like usage for the palette, because I only have written down 4 times for my Natasha Denona Retro palette, but you guys know like this was my level 1 palette for Project Level Up, and so I would think that I've used this more than the 4 times this year, but I'm not going to be a stickler for like, oh, I didn't count it every single time. Like, again, this is just kind of like a fun, like laid back way to see what I am reaching for. But yeah, this is what this palette looks like on the inside. All right, then I have one palette that I've reached for 5 times this year. So this is the Warrior palette by Juvia's Place. Again, the background on this is super reflective. Hopefully if I hold it right here. This is just really pretty, really nice like honey tones, you know, like a cheaper version of the Urban Decay Naked Honey. So I feel like I will reach for this a lot more in the fall as well. Okay, we are going to talk about this stack of eyeshadow palettes. I've used all of these palettes 6 times so far this year. So the first one I will show you is my ABH Jackie Aina palette. This is a palette that has been used quite a lot throughout its lifetime in my collection. This is my palette with the most amount of pans in it. I have 7 pans currently in it. This is my level 3 palette for my project level up that was created by Sophie Alexandra. So I'm looking to add 3 more pans into this palette. So definitely a very well loved one. Next, I have my Juvia's Place quad. This is the mince one, so the more like pastel version of the Army quad. Mixing this with the Army quad has been a lot of fun. I've greatly enjoyed this. You guys know I'm not like the biggest fan of pastel shadows, but I have been enjoying using them as companion palettes. I also have the Blueberry Muffin. It's been used 6 times. Again, very reflective background, but I just love this. I think this is one of my top favorite all-time palettes. Couldn't rave about it enough. You've probably gotten sick of me raving about it at this point. Okay, so then I have 2 palettes. They are both of my collaboration palettes that Angelica Nyqvist did. So the one she released this year with Udenzai, the Hella palette, I have used this 6 times since getting it into my collection. This is what this one looks like. Really pretty palette. I was not going to pick this up. My husband gifted this to me, and I'm really glad he did. Obviously, you can tell, like, I haven't owned this that long, and it's already, like, it's close to the top of the pack as far as usage goes. And then, obviously, my other palette from her and Kaleidos is the Club Nebula palette. I also believe this was one of the palettes that I said would be my most used throughout the year, and I do think we are well on track to that. I've already added another pan into this palette, the Naru shade right here, this like taupey kind of brown shade. I know like the background of this is reflective too, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, so I only have 2 more palettes to talk to you. These are my 2 most used palettes as we sit right here in my collection. So the first one is from Sugar Drizzle Cosmetics. This is the Frosty Flamingo palette. This is a really pretty pinky purple palette. I believe this has restocked, but I'm not quite sure. This is the first palette that I tried from the brand, and I absolutely really do enjoy it. This multi-chrome shade right here, Pinkaberry, is so pretty, so intense. It goes from like a pink to a blue to a green. It's just super pretty. So yeah, I used this palette 7 times. And then the palette that I have used the most times right now as we sit here is from Shroud Cosmetics. This is their collaboration with Batty Bean. This is the It's Freaking Bats palette. So let me open this up for you guys. This is what this one looks like on the inside. This is probably one of the most unique color stories within my collection. This palette really does challenge me to think outside the box and come up with some new, like, you know, color combinations. So that is it though. That is all of the palettes that I have used so far this year. You can expect to see a video where I am going to show you all of the palettes that I have not used yet this year. And again, when I say that, I mean like haven't used them from January to the end of March. So that video, and then we're going to do a video where I talk about all of the new eyeshadow palettes that have come into my collection. So yeah, keep tuned for that if that is exciting. Also, if you have any like recommendations on how to maybe streamline this, make this a little bit faster or a little bit more enjoyable for you guys, because this is the first year that I am doing this, please feel free to leave that down below. I am always open to any suggestions. I appreciate you so much for being here and for watching. I hope you're having a good day, a good night, or a good whatever, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye.